Welcome back to this series on love and the Enneagram, coming to you from Trinity Cathedral in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm the Reverend Adrienne Cook, and I am here today with Karen and Kayla, who are Enneagram Type 1s, and they are kicking off our body type section in an ongoing conversation about the centers of intelligence in the Enneagram. I'd like to say a little bit about each of these centers of intelligence and some of the highlights that we can take away, whether you are a head type, a heart type, or a gut type. So the thinking-based types, the head types, lead with ideas, with gathering information, with figuring things out and rational decision-making before acting. Their focus is on creating certainty and safety, finding multiple options. This is also known as the intellectual center. And if you'll recall, this was 5, 6, and 7. The heart types are a feeling-based type. They emphasize the heart for positive and negative feelings, empathy and concern for others, romance, devotion. Their focus is on success and relationship, performing up to expectations of the job or other people. And this is also known as the emotional center. And these were types 2, 3, and 4. Now we're shifting our attention to the body types. Body-based types lead with the body for movement, as we all do. But we're talking about sensate awareness, gut level knowing, intuition is strong with the body types. Focuses on personal security, control, social belonging, and taking right action in the world. This is also known as the instinctual center. And today we're looking at type 1, and then we will look at type 9, and we'll close out with type 8. Now, as body-based types, Enneagram 1s often have abundant physical energy, but they exercise an intense self-control over feelings and impulses. And this is in part due to a defense mechanism called reaction formation. Now, this can lead to maybe sometimes an image of physical rigidity in the body or tension in the body if you're just visually looking at type 1, or if you're someone who's wondering whether you might be an Enneagram type 1. If you tend to hold some of that tension in your body, that could be one of the signs. Ones have a good sense of knowing in their belly centers, an intuition that's strong, but they may not always be consciously aware of the resource, as many of us are not. So all type structures hold tension in their bodies in some way, but for ones, it can often show up in the diaphragm, in the breathing center. Breathing might feel impeded. So that's something to pay attention to in terms of this center of intelligence. So if you'll recall, we've been looking at scripture passages. The first scripture passage on love comes to us from 1 John, and it focuses on the reality that God is love. The second comes to us from 1 Corinthians, focuses on attributes of love between human beings, and the reminder that love is unfailing. So as we think about type 1's spiritual journey, it could perhaps be narrated as learning to love the present moment with all of its imperfections, by embracing the inherent perfection in the world, in ourselves, in that present moment. Serenity comes as the type 1 transforms their relationship to anger. Anger is the vice of type 1. And when they can shift their relationship with anger, they can accept mistakes in the world as a natural part of learning and growth. And they can relax as their focus shifts from the need to correct what's wrong to the acceptance that errors are a part of life, differences are a part of life, natural desires, the shadow self, natural impulses are a part of life. So here's what type 1s tell us about themselves. Their focus of attention goes to what is right or wrong, correct or incorrect. Their life lesson is to change what can be changed, to accept what cannot be changed, and to develop the wisdom to know the difference. If you've been a part of any 12-step programs or a fan of St. Francis attributed prayer, the Serenity Prayer, you'll recognize those words. To change what can be changed, to accept what cannot be changed, to develop the wisdom to know the difference. One speaking style, they're precise, they're clear, direct, honest, detail-oriented. Others may perceive them as judgmental or critical or sermonizing or close-minded when they get focused on the minutia. Type 1s tell us that they live with a powerful inner critic, an inner critic that monitors their thoughts and words and deeds. They strive for perfection, and they feel responsible for making things right, for bringing out the good in the world. They focus on being good while repressing any impulses or desires for pleasure that might indicate to them that they're bad. And they get angry when rules they deem important, standards they deem important, are ignored or violated. And each type 1 has their own rule, their own standards by which they live their lives by. And they seek love and approval from others by being good and right. To relate to the type 1, you should take their concerns seriously, respect their integrity, be responsible and honor your agreements with them, admit mistakes, we're all in it together trying to make the world a better place, and recognize that they are sensitive to criticism, that they are their worst critic. And now I introduce to you Kayla and Karen. Kayla, if you would, please tell us how you know you're a type 1 and how you got connected to this Enneagram series at Trinity Cathedral.
My name's Kayla. I came to be a part of Trinity Cathedral and this interview through doing an internship with our canon for ministry at the cathedral last year. I worked with our canon in building resources for parishes to plan intentional communities. And so that's how I ended up getting connected with Adrian, and I came to the Episcopal Church through my clinical training as a chaplain at the Cleveland Clinic. And that's actually also how I was introduced to the Enneagram. It was one of the didactics that we did as a part of our training, and learning about ourselves and becoming more aware of ourselves and how we interact with patients and staff and their loved ones. And so through this didactic, I actually at first thought that I was a type 6. And then the more that I explored with my supervisor, came to realize just how much I am very much a textbook 1. I feel a lot in my body, and I strive to do the best that I can, and probably most intensely have this really deep internal critic and desire to be good, and that has been a part of my story. And so learning all of this through doing this didactic, I was able to identify different parts of my growing up and my story, and be able to grow from them and kind of understand the different ways that that I can grow in, and as Adrian mentioned earlier, be more in the present moment, and not be so hard on myself for always having to be good and always doing the right thing. I did a lot of work on giving myself permission to actually feel my emotions and share them directly.
Thank you, Kayla. Well, you named a number of qualities of the type 1 that people use to discern whether this may be their type structure, particularly that impulsive focus of attention on what is good and whether I'm good enough. And you also named one of the most common mistypes, which is the type 1 and the type 6 with a 5 wing. And in a previous interview with the type 6, we explored some of the differences just a little bit, but for our audience, if you were unable to be present for that interview, a few of the differences that tend to show up are that type 6s with a 5 wing will narrate the internal criticism that happens more like a committee than like an individual voice. And so type 1s will often claim and recognize it is their own voice. It is their own impulse that guides them toward what is right or awareness of what is wrong. And type 6s will often say, I've got about 12 people in the room with me, and I'm listening to all of those voices, and they're critical voices, but it's really more of a panel. Or I know one 6 who described it as a pack of wolves. And so that's one of the places in which discerning the type, it may help to differentiate. Another is on the way anxiety shows up in the type 6 is often a diffused kind of anxiety, and it may still be related to a strong sense of responsibility that the type 1 and the type 6 share. But type 1s often will trust their intuition as to what they think is the right way or what is wrong with something that's happening. And type 6s often have a harder time discerning whether their intuition can be trusted. So those are just a couple of the differences between those two type structures. So thank you for bringing that to light, Kayla. Karen, I would invite you to share, how did you get connected to this Episcopal conversation, and how do you know that you're a type 1?
Well, I got connected with my best friend in the whole world, Cynthia Reese, who is part of the vestry and at Trinity. And I've known Cynthia for 40 years, and she has been my gleeful buddy and sacred companion and just dear, dear friend. So that's my connection to this workshop. The Enneagram and I've been around for more than 40 years together as well. And my spiritual director, I'm practicing badly Zen Buddhism, and she suggested that I go in through the Enneagram, 35 years ago, in a combination with biospiritual focusing, yay body, and a group of other things. And I volleyed back and forth between 1 and 3. But my discernment and intellect, fierce though it is my backup behavior, because I get this kind of deep, sad sigh when everyone mentions, serenity or even love, frankly. Love, my body is my home and my barometer of my connection with the divine. Now, my body cannot at all be flexible, fluid. Ironic, because I coach Broadway actors and thousands of dancing school children. That's it. I trust my body. My body, all my life, has really kept me alive. I trust my intuition. And the only problem comes, well, there are many problems, when somebody challenges that. I do a great job challenging myself. There's not just the 6 committee in here. We've got the whole United Nations. So that said, I think that the thing that's important in relation to helping people see if they're a 1, let's see what's helpful here. Goodness, abiding goodness. I have a good relationship now. It took decades. I'm going to be 72. It took decades. Me and my rage are like me and my arrow. I know it. Underneath the rage is this tremendous sorrow and sadness. I believe that rage is a cover emotion. It's easier to feel anger or irritated or self-castigate, but the sorrow and sadness abiding inside the 1 has been activated by what's going on in the world now. So I really think that I'm not sure what would be helpful to help all of you out there know if 1 is your thing, but the relationship with rage, and God finds me very dear, like a petulant, adorable dancer. Other people don't. They do find me judgmental and critical and needing to be right, all of which is true. But those are really just such veneers for just this fervent search for goodness and kindness and truth. Another word I don't want to hear at all is serenity. Don't make me go there. Not possible. I know. But there are words where the things we cannot change after 7 decades of trying to even approach practice of the present in the brother Lawrence and me were friends too. We just argued. The practice of the present is really difficult for me. In the 2 to 3 seconds that I'm present in any given minute, hour, or day, there are flashes of not serenity, but some kind of connection. So that's plenty from me.
Thank you, Karen. Well, that was very rich. There are a few points I'd love to draw out from your reflections. The most recent is the last time I heard a one say something along the lines of "Don't even go there with me" with serenity. Was followed by a reflection that the closest that I get is, well, this is good enough. And I don't know if that resonates at all. If there's sort of a threshold that is desirable, but part of the ability to find joy and laughter is to approach it with humility and say, well, maybe we won't reach it, but in this moment, but it's good enough for now. Can either of you speak to that concept? Does that resonate with you as type ones?
That resonates with me a lot, actually, because part of my bodily experience is that I have cerebral palsy, and so I spend a lot of my time and energy during the day like figuring out how to adapt and like and be able to thrive in different environments, and so giving myself permission to realize that something is not going as planned, an environment is not handicap accessible in the way that I thought it was, or was told that it was. To be able to be resilient and gracious with myself in that moment, to be like, well, this is what we've got, and it's okay. You'll make it work somehow. You've made it work for 30 plus years now. So being able to give myself grace in those moments when I have to even more quickly adapt than normal.
Thank you. Karen, was there anything there that you wanted to react to?
Mostly to that gorgeous phrase, Kayla, about gracious to myself. Because the level of my fury when I'm impeded is just huge, and it's exhausting. I have a lot of workarounds on a physical level as well. The most important being not being able to see. I only see out of one eye, and crippling arthritis. So among other things, but I don't have a lifelong condition. So the graciousness to myself is a phrase I really love. So thank you for that. In regard to the enough, I'm getting better about that. It feels like the standards are so minuscule. I have tremendous joy and delight and happiness and peace in bed eating when I'm reading. It's just parties and noise and all that. It drives me crazy. But and it feels discouraging that my definition of enough is that I can sit still in yoga for long enough to chant 1 Om, not 3. And to realize that that's just the way it is, because physical stillness and the pain override that it takes is so great that really I'm just got a to-do list of all of the different body things I'm going to need to do when I have to stand up off the damn cushion. So the not enough is a set of impossible standards. I have a book on spirituality of the sacred body for performers. So you go into, what standards I'm trying to get. For now, I would like to be able to walk without injury. And I would like to be able to have more fluidity and grace. I'm a runner or a schlepper or a trotter or whatever you call somebody really slow. I would like some kind of enough for running would be 2 to 3 good minutes out of an hour instead of constant pain. And so and I long for much more enough. So I guess enough is a real issue for me because my enough keeps shrinking.
Well, Karen, something you're even modeling for us, I think, in the type 1 structure is that that it's not a universal perfection that all type 1s share, but ones often have what perhaps at times could be revealed as a list or a sense of the areas of particular passion. I don't know what word you might use as a type 1, belief, integrity, that standards that you hold yourself to. And I heard these sort of goals listed that you have for yourself, even just in one small area, such as, well, not small, but one area such as my body and the way that I would like to move through the world and be able to say that this is enough, or this is okay, or I'm okay in this moment. Is there anything there you'd like to speak to, either of you, about the sort of particularities of the kind of perfection, maybe as some would describe it, that can show up in your own personal lives?
What struck me most from what you were saying, Adrienne, was actually the gentle reminder that I guess each one's idea of perfection is different. That it's not like a whole Enneagram 1 type thinks that this one thing is perfect. That each idea of perfection and seeking goodness is unique to that particular one. And I think that was a good reminder for me today.
Is that in part in the impulse to hold others to a standard, or an assumption that others are sharing in a same standard? Or could you say more about why that feels like an important awareness to hold in your mind?
Yeah, I think for me right now in this moment, it's coming from this like realization, this reminder of understanding that we need to have as much grace with ourselves as with others, and that everybody is unique in their own story and in their own person. But then also, if you're talking about different folks that identify with one, that their idea of perfection is different than your idea of perfection.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess I have to be careful of what I call the big clobber. And I have a set of rules for myself to get through the day, and one is to avoid looking for any lost item for more than 20 minutes. And the big clobber. So the big clobber means I've successfully navigated breakfast and getting up, which is a big deal. I just love to sleep and be in bed. God, heaven is sleep as far as I'm concerned.
Read in bed, eat in bed, sleep in bed. Just such a great location.
Don't bother me when I'm in bed.
You drink tea in bed, Karen?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you drink tea while you're reading, or some other?
No, I drink coffee and it makes me go to sleep, as if this is more anxiety.
Wow, yeah.
Anyway, but the big clobber is important. I think that, which is, if you even have moderate success in one area, the next area, it's like having a brain like a roulette wheel with an agenda that has, let's say on a good day, 12 items, since there's 12 apostles, okay? And as soon as you nail the food thing, then you can go to the messy house thing, and then you can go to the unfinished book thing, and then you can go to the relationship with the person you love my husband. And I do not do something that was mentioned, expect other people. I'm so nice to other people. Well, not really, but on the whole, I will go through multiple steps if somebody else is behaving the way I do, to forgive them, understand them, zip my lip and not say anything. But back to the list. So the big clobber means on a good day, I can say, no, you cannot go to the other 11 items of everything you haven't accomplished in your life. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So that's my response to whatever the question was. I'm so sorry.
No, that's wonderful.
I wrote
That's
it down, but I don't remember anymore.
That's wonderful. I'm sitting with, so my spiritual director is a type 1. And I remember when the pandemic began, I was speaking with her, and I can't remember if she brought it up or I brought it up, but the conversation was surprise at how I was just living in a moment of joy and relaxation, and I wasn't doing any self-work, because I've been on a journey of self-work for at least the last 12 years of really intense self-work. And it was this sort of surprise season where I was just sort of living in the moment and experiencing the joy. As a type 8, I can have quite a bit of intensity in whatever my passions are. And we were then reflecting for a moment where she just said something along the lines of, I don't know that I've ever had a moment where I haven't done self-work. She kind of laughed at it, and said, in fact, during the pandemic, she felt it even more intensely, because it was just, there was this layer of isolation to be with that critical voice, or on a good day, she also has Buddhist tendencies. And so the inner observer, and sort of balancing that inner critic with the voice of the inner observer that has a more compassionate or lighthearted approach to the self-reflection. So would either of you like to speak to that sort of interplay between observation and criticism, and the fine lines within the psyche, when that boundary is crossed, or how you avoid crossing it? I heard some of that in the big clobber.
I'll go to the observer because for many legitimate reasons, I've been asked to rethink my own accurate instinctive judgments while coaching. I do a lot of coaching. And because of my hyper interest in helping people, compulsive fixing, let's just call it what it is. I have been cutting people short and saying things quickly in order to get it done, to quote, help them. And people have experienced it as dismissive or being judged. In terms of the inner observer, I always boomerang what I have wonderful clients. I work with preachers. They reflect back to me exactly what's going on, and they take full accountability. So if it comes from one of my preachers, I know we need to look here. And what arrived was this really astute observer, but it was extremely judgmental. There was not a dispassionate observer. We won't even go to the inner critic, which has, pom-poms and a whole squadron, because I can just slam the door on that. But the nature of my observer is still a big work in progress, especially since I've had to legitimately call my own intuitive judgments into question. Because even if they were accurate, how I put them out in the world was not good, kind, helpful to anyone, me or them. So the inner observer for me is still pretty filtered. It's not edge. That dispassionate watcher. No way.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's probably a helpful reflection for those who might be considering whether they're a type 1. And just to give a little a larger scope of maybe what the inner observer means is, we call aspects of self-awareness, we attribute them at times in Enneagram work to the inner observer, who allows us to witness our internal patterns that drive our outer behaviors.
Mhm.
So the practice itself often involves focusing inwardly, becoming aware of thoughts or sensations, other objects of attention as they arise within us. And the hope is that our inner observer invites us to become more fully present to our truest self, even as our type patterns, our ego structures are active, with an invitation for them to relax a bit so that we can become more receptive. And what I hear in the type 1 structure, as you've narrated it for your own personal story, Karen, is that that receptivity and relaxation shows up, but similar to sort of the conversation about serenity and good enough, it sort of reaches the bar, but it doesn't quite latch onto it. There's not maybe a clear resolution of that dividing line between the inner observer and the inner critic.
Well said. Yes.
Kayla, is there any of that generate any thoughts on in your own personal experience?
What's coming to mind right now is, again, a lot of the work that I've had that's innately come from living with a disability. And I've had people tell me all of my life that I'm very self-aware. And so I think for me in my spiritual journey and using the Enneagram as a tool, being able to observe the different patterns and the different ways that my body feels, emotionally and physically, has helped me to try to cultivate intentional practices of finding space to be able to relax. So I practice yoga very regularly, and I started practicing meditation. And something, actually, Adrienne, something that you mentioned earlier when you were talking about feeling light and joyful, something that helps me to relax and to express my emotions is dancing. And I've found a lot of joy in that all throughout my life, since I learned how to walk. And recently I've found it as a tool and a practice to be able to release emotion and tap into the anger and the frustration that I feel, both in myself and with my world around me.
Mm. I love the way in which I hear both of you narrating. It's something I've heard about the type 1 structure, which is similar to the type 8, which we can have a black and white narrative that we then sift enough to try to find a gray space in for ourselves. And even just the way you just narrated, Kayla, you moved from anger to joy in the same story. And the dancing somehow allows you to experience all of that and be present, and it's okay to have that all happening at the same time, maybe even. I love that. And I want to share just another anecdote from a very close friend of mine. I've known him for decades. And I remember one trip we took together in the car. We were driving through, we were driving by a shopping center. So we weren't even in the parking lot yet, but we had slowed down. You know, like in a mall, there's sort of the road before you move into the parking lot. You're kind of circling the mall area. Well, we were having a conversation, and then all of a sudden I heard this sort of frustrated oomph come from him, and the car swerves, and we're driving into the parking lot of some place. And I'm thinking, where are we going? Why are we here? And he stops the car and he gets out, and I'm just watching him. And I look over, and he picks up this giant box and is helping this elderly woman put it into her car. And so as we had been driving, he noticed the sort of focus of attention on something that was wrong. He noticed that there was a woman who was struggling with a box from a store that we weren't even headed on our way to. And I felt the anger and frustration in him that no one was helping. I didn't know what it was until after, and he told me that that was it. He thought, there are people walking by her. How is this okay? And so he was furious at them, you know, flew the car to the side and then helped her, came back into the car, didn't say a word. He just did it. And I had to process for a moment all that happened. So I felt the rough edges of the type structure, right? For a moment, I thought, did I do something wrong? Where is he going? What's happening? But there was this strong inner drive driven by anger at the way something was and that it was wrong. And it was harming someone else in his mind. It was out of this deep love, which you had brought out, that the fine line between rage and love earlier, Karen, and now I'm hearing anger and joy. So I offered that as an anecdote at maybe the ways in which the type 1 mind plays with these extreme emotional states, and maybe holds within yourselves these extreme emotional states and finds avenues and ways to express them, whether it's dance or helping someone out, reforming a moment, or experiencing the joy and lightheartedness of a moment. That's my summary experience of all that I've heard so far.
I love that story, and I'm sorry to cut you off. This is the urgency of the one, but I do a lot of work with the police in this wonderful project where the police and all the angry community people all put on a show together, and it's very interesting. And my rage that people don't help is uncontrollable. Now, when you're working with a bunch of male and female cops, they control it, but they feel this is something we share. These wonderful, wonderful police officers who just want to help and don't understand why other people don't. So they brought that up. The other thing that's very important for me is that there is some solace in between the land of black and white, and it's an expansive way of being in the body. So when Kayla was talking about dancing, there's a wonderful process by Gabrielle Roth where you go through stages, and one is lyric and one is chaotic, and it's a marvelous process. But the critical middle for me is the opposite of black and white thinking. And I try not to be a know-it-all, but I am, because the nuance essential for handling the moments, especially now, is so important. The only way for me to do it is to expand and get bigger. And I think before, physically. So I can hold a roulette wheel in my head. I can hold an inner observer and an inner critic. I can hold my rage and my compassion. I can hold it all. I am that big. And I can create a physical body that's a conduit, or at least a vessel, like a crucible that won't break. That said, it's tiring. And as one more thing gets thrown in, and God knows we all have so many more things that are thrown in. Everybody is at their best and worst lately, in my opinion. So this need to get bigger. More space. I practice yoga as well. More space in the joints. And by more, I was longing for 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. We're not talking that. We're talking that some kind of band lets go just a little bit, a tiny little bit. But it is more spacious within. So thanks for letting me run on about that. But this need to be expansive rather than either or. And to be nuanced is, I feel so critical as a source of safety and solace and self-care and self-love and connection with the divine, because God doesn't care. I mean, God loves me anyway, so.
Yeah, I love this reflection, and I'm going to come back with my own in a reflection that's unformed but reactive to what you were saying. And it's a theological concept that often tries to polarize the idea of abundance and the idea of scarcity. So I'm sort of drawing back into myself at the beginning of this conversation and thinking about love, and And that quotation that I invited you to read, Karen, from Christian tradition tells us that God is love. And that, so this infinite, expansive, receptive container that holds us. And something about you making yourself bigger feels like an invitation to tap into the kind of love that God has for us and invites us to participate in. That we ourselves are made in an image that can live in the abundance of what is good, even in moments where goodness seems so scarce. So there's something on an intuitive level that I'm really connecting with what you're saying, that I don't feel like I have anything more than a big picture to throw out there. Kayla, is any of this connecting?
I don't know how much I have to say about this, but I just, this idea of growing bigger, it resonates with me again, both when as a one, I'm thinking about my own sense of self, but then also in hearing the stories that have been shared about being in the world, making ourselves bigger in the world, and being able to tap into the goodness and the sacredness of the mercy and justice that can be present, and working towards that in little and big ways, and how, in a sense, that also is something that the folks that identify as ones work towards, is making the world a better place, right? And so just this idea of making ourselves bigger and making the world bigger, I feel like there's a lot of grace in that, and a lot of abundance and goodness in that phrase. So that's not fully formed, but
it's good enough, right? So I am struck. My heart feels quite warm right now, and as I'm listening to the two of you talk about abundance and this sort of expansion of the self, I'm struck by the juxtaposition of that concept with what I began with, which is, the type 1 structure constricts body and is rigid. And I'm right now, as you're talking, I just have these images of you all dancing and taking up this interior opening up of space that is literally being exposed to the world through twirls and jumps and just beauty, just absolute beauty. And so that it's in itself, I think, narrates the journey of the type 1 structure, from a kind of constriction to a kind of freedom, from a sense of fear or insecurities to a sense of security and calm, dare we even say nearing serenity.
I can go for beauty. Beauty is unequivocally the great healer. And for beauty is, and for years when I was able to, I practiced Aikido. And Aikido is this, you take somebody's energy, and if they're coming out, and you send it back to them, and it's just this glorious kind of expansive orb from the diaphragm. And it doesn't matter if your diaphragm is locked and blocked, because your hara is below it, and it's strong enough to go right through that sucker and out into the world. And this, and I will say that beauty undoes me. And all forms. The beauty of Kayla talking about that, kind of going up that ramp, that was one of the most beautiful stories. Going up a ramp, when they tell you there's a ramp and there isn't, and how you dealt with it. So there's verbal beauty, there's the beauty of the world, there's the beauty of, I could go on and on. Beauty I can handle. Relaxation, serenity.
Well, as we near the end of our conversation, I want to invite both of you to reflect on some of the imagery and words on the screen or really anything that we've talked about that you also would just like to circle back on, and see if you have any reactions to some of this content related to the type 1.
Immediately my eye is drawn towards the like sun shape around goodness and sacredness. And again, for me, I think it's coming from this place of, as someone who identifies as a 1, constantly working towards knowing and living into my own goodness and sacredness, but then sharing that outward in a beautiful way. Very much like the rays of the sun are twirling and dancing. And for me as a chaplain, being able to cultivate sacred space for others to be able to tell their stories.
Kayla, I never would have noticed that as a sun shape around there. I love that that's what you were drawn to. And I'm thinking even of playing with it metaphorically, the anger or the rage of the 1 as this idea of a heat radiate, a heat within the self, a passion, and then finding a way in which it can radiate and warm the world, right? And others can find comfort in that heat. It's a beautiful, and let's call it goodness. Let's call it sacredness. Beautiful.
I'm hearing my dear mother, who had a refrigerator magnet that said, clean up the world tomorrow, today just do your room. And she also maintained, and we had a very fraught relationship, that I was always deeply kind. And my problem was in trying to do that instead of the kind of person who grew to talk about herself behind her own back. That said, I'm very surprised to find that what I'm drawn to is dutiful and competent. Because I have been in despair about the lack of competence in the world. And I work with first responders, and I work with people whose job it is to keep us alive. And for a while I was a political coach and coached elections. So when I see competent and dutiful, I just glow. And all the words about beauty, that's great, but dutiful, to do what you say you're going to do, and have the ability. And if you don't have the ability, find somebody who does. This just stirs my heart. And it is the way I've lived my life. And they're not, happy little words. They're kind of serviceable words. But I've always believed that the only way I can feel love is in action anyway. Because if I relied on my feelings, that wouldn't happen. So I'm drawn to dutiful and competent, and I just love people who are both of those, myself included. I'm dutiful and competent as well. So I love that's what I'm drawn to.
Thank you. And this is a great moment for me to say that there are 2 other type structures that would share that love of competency. And one of them being the type 5, and the other the type 3, which you mentioned, Karen, sort of wavering back and forth between type 3, type 1. And so those types can sort of look alike in their love of competency, and that for you can even supersede beauty at times. Says a lot, I think, as to how meaningful competency can be, particularly to those type structures. Well, I am deeply, deeply, deeply grateful for this conversation, and really struck by the joy that I feel present. And I thank you for that, and the work that both of you, the kinds of non-critical work that both of you must have done to be able to get to that place of expressing joy in this kind of a context. So thank you for all the time that you have given to this today. I'd like to close us with a prayer that was written by Sandra Smith, who is a coach and a spiritual director in Asheville, North Carolina. And she writes prayers for each type, and gives God, our higher power, a name that is sort of, she believes, is inspired by the type structure. And so in this prayer, she addresses God as great I am. And I invite you or our audience to hear this prayer with me. Great I am, you, with no memory of the past and no eye on the future, hold me in this perfect moment. Thank you for your acceptance of who I am and loving me because of who I am. Empty me now of my judgment and guilt. Teach me forgiveness so that I may forgive myself for not forgiving myself. Journey with me on this path toward accepting myself as I loosen rules and lower standards that prevent me from fully loving. Loosen rules and lower standards that prevent me from fully loving. May I come to know deep in my marrow my inherent goodness, so that my earning and efforting may end and I can rest in your boundless grace and mercy. Amen.
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 Thank
Great prayer. What a great prayer.
you.
Wow.